Look, how come you never say that stuff when we're recording?
Because I'm smart.
Can I have some of that? Because I apparently need it.
We've been trying to give it away the whole time.
Everybody, this is Thursday, April 6th. It's 10 a.m. Eastern time. We're having our weekly staff meeting. We've had a little humor to start. Jacob isn't here today. I'm apparently he's keeping some woman on campus busy this morning. He tried to say that in code, but or at least I'm
Professor. A
Huh?
professor.
What?
Somebody's learning something.
He's talking about a professor. Oh, I thought he was talking about, in the dorms or something. Anyway,
I'd be upset if he was turning us down for that.
yeah, I'm sure he's not. I'm sure it's just boring necessary stuff for academics. But anyway, before I take it into the gutter, before I take it in the gutter again, the point I was making is that for me, it's really rewarding to work this way. So I just want to keep it working that way, if that's okay. And if that happens, we're going to get done because it's really not that much work. The book is the thing that's the work because you got to defend everything. The Constitution is just a summary. And then we'll just keep on the website. And then we'll have a great path from this. Our website's pretty nice at this point. So go from there to the policies, to the acts, right? And we sort of have this beautiful introduction to everything. It's pretty good. I do notice we have to clean up some of the language because some of it, not language, some of the phrasing. It's not the language. It's not like I'm using curse words, but I was pretty angry when I was writing some of it. So it's gotta be toned down a bit. But that was what, Martin, when were we doing that? 19? We did that in spring of 19, right? It was
an angrier time.
What
when we worked on the
Constitution?
Yeah, it was like the spring of 19, right?
Maybe 20, not sure.
Yeah, something like that. I don't fucking know.
Practically ancient history at this pace.
Well, people are right that the COVID made the years sort of turn into it's like the COVID space.
We did 10 in the last 2.
It's terrible. It's terrible.
It's terrible.
And they were all backwards.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks.
What did you say?
So they were all backwards. We went backwards 10 years in the last year.
It's terrible.
So how come things aren't better?
Oh my God.
Well, time didn't go backwards. It was
right.
our maturity.
Because nature doesn't actually work that way. We just tried to force it.
That's crazy. So that's my basic thing is that if I want to stay healthy and working at this pace, and I will feel pretty good about it. The exciting thing is that I'd like to get there, and then like we have the 130 legal arguments to make, right? The 130 moral proofs to write. And boy, I would love to be able to have the Constitution written enough so that ChatGPT could help us write those, because we'd be training it by helping it write them. Right? So the rate this shit is changing. I mean, I've never seen it like this. Look, when did you start working in IT? What year did you work in tech? Start working in tech, do you think?
2004, 2005, something like that.
Yeah, okay. So of course I started in the late 70s, right? Because I'm an old partner. So, but I've never seen anything like this before. Nothing. There's nothing close. I mean, when Windows came around, when that concept came around, it's, nobody can remember it anymore. But I remember walking up to Apple Lisa at the trade show and my jaw hitting the fucking floor. Right. Right. And then, of course, the problem is you can't code. Apple wanted to maintain they want to maintain their phone. They want to maintain the computer. So you couldn't do anything. Right. But you could with IBM, but still the rate at which that was happening was really slow. But I mean, look, so, but then you saw what happened when they started the open source movement, and so we started moving to scripting languages and how fast programming. I mean, it went all over the fucking place. I mean, there's a goddamn language a week, right? You're trying something different. And then but that was nothing. And that compared to this shit, I mean, it's like there's this monumental need to reach the minimum sufficient infrastructure for things, right? And the language model is provided the minimum infrastructure for working with the tool set. And I mean, it's like, I have a search running and I actually can't watch or read all the stuff that's coming up every fucking day. It's insane. And then then, you know, there's the papers, and the papers don't want to give anything away, right? So like the papers for Microsoft or on the, like, and you're like, wait a minute, somebody's put this out the other day. There's like 140 emerging properties. In other words, emergent intelligence is intelligence emerges from a simple system, which is what we've been talking about biologically for a long time. But that's coming out there. I'm like, God damn, you know, the world needs our shit right now. You know, it just needs our shit. So let's get done. But if we just keep on it, we'll get done. And I mean, I get tired after 2 to 3 hours, right, Bryan? I'm still I can last about 2 to 3 hours somewhere.
Some
Yes.
people can't. Some people can't think at all, so don't beat yourself up.
Well, I used to be able to think for lots of hours, right? So,
Yes.
so
I don't know. People have a hard time doing more than 1 to 2.
yeah.
Most people can't do a half an hour, but most people have a hard time in 1 to 2.
You know what it is? It's 25 minutes.
Yeah.
That's about the maximum time
Mhm.
that the average person can think.
But you can see in the podcast world, like there are 3-4 hour podcasts, and there's only 2 people. They're doing half the talking, and sometimes one person is doing very much most of the talking. They can hold a cognitive frame for that long. There are people who are at the top of the hierarchy. I watched Balaji did almost 8 hours with Lex Friedman.
Who did?
Balaji,
Yes.
almost 8 hours. I don't know.
Well, I could talk to Lex Friedman for 8 hours. Right? I mean, you can. No, to my current condition, I'd last for it.
That's what I'm saying.
I'd last for it. I mean, I can see myself doing it, but I would physically last for it. But you know, that's because it's like, you know, he's got his questions prepared, right? And so you can do that. But when you're trying to actually do analysis, right, like what we were doing yesterday, which is beautiful, really. And what did we reduce it to? Like 25 lines? You know, I mean, it's like 2 sets, right? We did the causal origin of rights, obligations, and then the causal relationship between inalienabilities, obligations, and rights, right? And we did some more on. So, you know, that was, I don't know, that seemed to be harder than it should have been. I'm going to congratulate you, though, dude. I was not thinking you were going to, it was kind of, that was the wrong way. It was impressive to me that you were able to do the same thing. So, like, you know, that's like, you know, I'm kind of inspired.
I'm taking high praise.
Do you think I'd be any use if I joined you?
If you'd be willing to do it, I think so.
Sure.
We could work on the stuff. The problem for you and I is time frame, because by the time, oh no, you are okay in the afternoon, right? It's the afternoon for you. Okay, so no, it would work.
When I don't have to wake up in the morning, I move to the American time.
Oh, I see. So if we could do that, that would be great. That would get me through it even faster. Because the 2 brains thing is so much easier. It's just way better. It's like pair programming. All right, so if we could do that, that would be helpful. What's next? Okay, what else is going on this week? What's going on this week? Anything interesting? Lindsay's still doing a good job. We were talking a few minutes ago before we were recording about the fact that, you know, it's like we have there's a lot of energy in our community to move forward, but there's a sort of minimum platform we have to have before we can take advantage of it. Just because there's a minimum platform we have before we can generate the money to pay for the investments necessary to do something. So, you know,
We have to insure. We have to
Huh?
insure people. We have to insure
What?
people.
Yeah.
We have to be liable and insure people that we're working with. That's the threshold. Well, we just discussed the same threshold with states.
Right.
Be able to support what it is you're offering people, or you won't be able to offer it for long.
You know, Brad comes as a good example. He comes up with a lot of ideas. He's put on like, well, I always say I try not to positively reinforce or not negatively reinforce. I'm like, yeah, but Brad and I talked about that 4 years ago. You know, the things we know, right? That can be done, but the problem is having enough offer to be legitimate enough to be able to get people to make an equal investment. And what I said is we had to have the work done far enough, and then we had to have enough guys so it was right. There was social proof, right? Evidence that we can all do stuff. Now, if you look at each of our things, what's coming out of them, I'm kind of blown away by Luke and Noah in particular. I mean, I'm always blown away by Martin and Brandon, right? If you look at the quality of Luke and Noah's writing of late, it's fucking insane. You know, it's absolutely brilliant. And so we have, you know, we just need enough of that for the social proof, and we need the thing. Right now, it's like it's not just me. It's all, you know, it's like I said, don't make it me, right? It's got to be us. Right?
We have at least 2 dozen guys that all they need is the social cover to jump into the sphere.
Right, exactly.
The social cover doesn't exist yet.
Right.
So you create the social cover with the activists, then you
Yeah.
onboard the smart people swiftly. And
Right.
then
We have to remove
it's
the
not even a
risk.
game anymore. It's
Right.
abuse of the children that exist.
Right. So anyway, and so, you know, I got down on myself because I got sick for a long time. This really hurt my progress. But on the other hand, I look at this and I'm like, it's so much better to understand than it has ever been before. Right. And, you know, it's like, don't go to market early. We're going to be on time for the market. So I'm sorry, I'm looking at the thing above us while we're talking. There's stuff that Martin and I could go over in the Constitution, but there's also, yes, there's also, Martin and I can do well, we'll work on it. What I'm trying to do is I want to focus on getting this done, this part done. Yes, let me see what you mean. I think man goes through to what? Goes to reproductive. What's the end point? It goes, you know. Right, so group strategy. Yeah, it does handle all that, so can handle all those issues. So there's stuff in the science, right? In we call nature, which is the laws, the science. That's so I have it broken up into nature, man, and language. Right, those are the definitions, right? And so if we went over that, we could do it. Martin's very good at the social group strategy stuff. Okay, we could do that. And Brad doesn't like talking about it. All right. Okay, so what else is going on? Anything in the news?
The Trump indictment.
It's a great topic. I mean, it's really interesting because if you read it, it's fucking clown world. Basically, the crime they're saying is because he committed a crime because when he declared it on his taxes, he counted as a deductible. So his prior works were criminal because they led to the obfuscation. And I'm like, so what do you want me to do? You want me to say I paid off my whore on the fucking corporate balance sheet? I mean, what the fuck? What do you think I'm going to do? Of course, I'm going to create a corporation to take care of this stuff and insulate it between layers and pay. Okay, the second thing is, do we know if it was a bribe or a blackmail payment? It's hush money, right? But is
I don't know the story. I don't know the story well enough to tell you.
okay, so Stormy Daniels, right? Am I wrong? Is it Stormy Daniels? All right,
Yeah.
is that who's all right? So she's basically a hooker,
That's what I know of her.
right? So she's a porn actress, right? A hooker. And people don't know this, but she's the body double for a lot of nudes in Hollywood movies because she has no problem getting on stage, right? Doing a nude scene with some actor while they pull the actress off, because some a lot of actresses don't want to do that shit, right? So she was the body double, right? And so she's a well-known person, right? She's attractive enough to get into this crap. And so what's Trump doing? He's like, I'm got married to this young woman. She's got kids. She's not giving me enough sex, right? I'm going to go and get my exercise through a subcontractor, which of course, if you're a wealthy guy, this is just how you think about the world. And so he hires a subcontractor to provide necessary physical services. And so, and then he goes and he's like, well, I guess I'm going to run for president. And this woman's apparently a risk if this gets out. So he was like, well, I don't know if she called and said, I want something here, or if they said, okay, in their due diligence, we need to make sure she's not going to say anything. But in either way, I mean, she's a fucking fucker. And he paid her to shut up. I mean, you pay them for sex, you pay them to go away, and you pay them to shut the fuck up.
See, the mistake he made, he should have done what Biden did and made her his vice president.
Oh God. Anyway, and I guess that maybe I'm just jaded because when you do business with that level, you run into characters, right? Everybody's got some fucking crazy thing. Like one of my investors, he ended up bopping his like massage therapist and divorcing his wife and marrying her. Why? Because she's hot and young and willing. And he's like, well, she's hot, young, and willing, and my wife is not hot. She's not young, and she's not willing, and she's a pain in the ass frequently. I don't want to fight that hard to get laid. And so, you begin to think about your world that way. When you have like, I have all these liberties and whatever in the rest of the world, right? Because I can do anything, and my wife is a fucking pain in the ass, right? So I understand this, right? He didn't even try to divorce his wife, right? He just wanted some external satisfaction of the male exercise needs. So, and I also, of course, to me, I'm like, it's the same thing with Clinton. I couldn't believe they were fucking prosecuting Clinton over getting a blowjob from an intern. I mean, the word, even with Clinton, you could say, well, she's an intern, she's an impressionable. Well, she's a Jewish girl, she's a hooker anyway. So can't say in public what the phrase in Russian they use, so I won't use it. It's just really derogatory. But anyway, he's getting ahead from some intern. Well, you could say, well, that's a power thing, right? That maybe she was coerced or something, even though you look at any photo of her doe eyes as she's looking at him. Right? So I'm like, okay, well, this is just not something I want my president to prosecute. This is fucking clown world. Right. And so the idea that, he's going to be in trouble for like covering up an indiscretion, that's not a high crime. I'm sorry. And who else did they get? What general did they get under Trump for something? They set up who's the general?
Flynn.
Well, Flynn. They set up Flynn for the same kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have people coming from federal agencies to testify for Congress, like the SBA and Small Business Administration, and the giving money to Planned Parenthood, and they lie overtly to Congress about a violation of the public trust. Right? I mean, and that doesn't go anywhere. And the same guy who's the prosecutor for Trump is the guy that's let open the gates. He's not even publishing. He's not even prosecuting felonies in New York anymore because he's a Soros funded DA, right?
Mm-hmm. It's not good at economics either. Apparently he spent $200 million getting Trump up to New York and making this case.
Well, I mean, it's just purely this is why we had the prohibition on this kind of nonsense. So now we've got to take it and move it from a tradition of between gentlemen to a freaking codification, because I don't understand. It's like who's Berlusconi? Who's the Italian prime minister that was plowing through mistresses and actresses and God knows models and hookers and whatever? Was it Berlusconi? I don't care. I'm like, it's Italy. That's what they do. I mean, it's like life in Italy. What do we care about an Italian prime minister who likes to go around? And then we had the Finnish prime minister who just got lost her job, by the way, because she's out dancing with her girlfriends. Well, she's 34 years old. Right? I mean, it's got to be a high crime, or why are we talking about it? I just don't get it. I mean, we're all human. We all do dumb shit. I've done dumb shit. I know you can't imagine it, but it has happened. I'm waiting for Luke to say something about a marriage, and I just did I need to let it cook some longer before?
No, you're good. I just you're just missing Curt again. I don't think you miss companionship. You just miss being in court. So.
I have plans to bring him back.
Every once in a while, you just need to argue in front of a judge. I think it's really it's the judge's robe that really gets you going, not any of the women that get you into court.
Well, you can't do that in family court because the way the court has some very obtuse language, which is like a preponderance of, it's not preponderance, a pattern of the evidence. So you can't be it. Whereas if we're in court for some other matter, I can make a circus of a fucking courtroom, like I do everything else, and make a circus of a courtroom, and everybody's fucking entertained, right? And it works, right? But you can't do that in family court because they're just out to get you. There's nothing you can say as a man in a family courtroom that other than I submit and I will obey, and that's it. I mean, there's nothing. You're always guilty. They don't require any evidence. They believe these women when they make crap up. So, did I tell you the story of my divorce? My divorce? Did I tell you this story? I told my story. You want to hear the story? It's kind of funny.
We're recording.
What?
Just don't forget we're recording.
Oh, it's not nothing. Okay. So at one point we had black mold in the house, right? So we live in Seattle. It rains all the time, right? And so we had a flat roof, and they didn't keep it level enough, so water got inside the walls. So we got black mold on the south side of the house. So So at one point, my wife was telling me we can do this. I'm like, no, you don't understand. We have to burn the house down to get rid of it, right? Right. We can't do that. I mean, I want to move because I wanted to move. Right. So we eventually end up tearing the back of the house off, tearing the roof off, the whole thing, replacing, right down to the studs, replacing everything, bleaching it and the whole thing. So it gets, and so the black mold goes away. But anyway, so so this is what they do. They sit with your wife sits with your lawyer, and they come up with, did he ever say anything like this? And they say that I threatened to burn the house down. And I'm like, I'm not settling this until that's retracted. And she said, they can't retract it because that's an admission of lying to the court. And I'm like, I can't have that. I mean, I'm a professional. I run a very large company. I have interests all around the world. I can't have a piece of that, something like that, in a legal document waiting for whatever. Well, we'll just have the record sealed. Okay. Still, it's like claiming I threatened. I mean, you got to know how I am about money, right? I'm not going to burn an asset. That would be fucking insane. I could axe murder my own wife before I'd burn down an asset. I mean, that would just be contrary to everything about my character.
Sure, have that on record.
Sorry?
Sure, have that recorded.
Right.
Well, yeah, but it's like this is one of those things where
That one's lined up for his next divorce.
Well, it's no, but it's thanks. Asshole. So it's like the thing of like I say lots of stupid stuff, right? I mean, and partly for hyperbolic or hyperbolic effect, or to get through what I think of it as to get through the thick skulls of neurotypicals, right? I say a lot of hyperbolic stuff, but if you take it out of context, I mean, you can make it look like anything, and this is the problem I have with the same thing with most stuff is they're taking the Trump thing out of context and making it look like more than it is. It's just like, look, I just don't want anybody to find out I've been banging a hooker because, but what am I going to do? Can you imagine him saying, well, I wasn't getting enough pussy from my wife and she was having a kid and whatever. And he's not going to blame it on, if he tells the truth, he's blaming his wife. Right. So, I mean, there's no way out of it. Anyway, so I just find this is what the rest of the world disrespects our system of government for, is that we do too much laundry in public. And that's really because our libels or defamation laws are too weak. They need to be restored. Which is there's things that are you can't testify to, right? That's right. There's things that you can't testify to and are harmful. There's things you can, in other words, to the person. There are things that you can testify to, are true and are harmful to the person, but are irrelevant. Right? They're not a matter of public liability or crime, right? In other words, we need to have this ability to forgive each other for being human, because we all fuck stuff up. I mean, Luke, I realize you're perfect, but for the rest of us, we're not.
That's not true.
No, that's why it's best to accuse you of it, because you'll never take it, right? So we need our laws reformed to say, well, defamation is when you cause harm to a reputation, when it's not for material, in support of material harm. And technically speaking, there's no, one of the things that we have about this crime is there's no victim here, right? I mean, she got paid 130 grand, right? This is a mutually beneficial situation. The only crime is that they recorded as a tax deduction. Right. And that's like, okay, the last time that happened, it cost a guy $500, which was decades ago, right? It was $60 at the time. It's $500 today. So why are we even bothering with this? I just don't get it. You know why it is? It feeds those petty, simple pieces of, that are drama queens. And all it does is foster this devolution of the public sphere into GSSRN. It's revolting. It's disgusting. I think it's disgusting because it's a disgust response, but it's childish, right? I mean, is there anything wrong here other than it's just childish? And who cares about it other than the children? It's like, if you care about this, you're saying you're a fucking child. I mean,
They're doing a lot of that.
well, I mean, but this is the problem. Look where we are. Hold on a second. Let me make sure this is okay. Sure this is okay.
They think they're principled in their pursuit of the orange man. Demonstrably.
Say that again.
They think they're principled in the pursuit of the orange man.
But
Morally
they are
righteous.
because they can't distinguish
Mhm.
between the
Oh, yeah,
interpersonal and
They're wrong.
or
They're wrong. And children. Yeah, of course.
children.
Mhm.
But then it just feeds them, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's like starve the beast. You can't feed the worst human in it. In other words, what is baiting into hazard? It's feeding the beast, right? What are we trying to do? We're trying to produce agentful adults, right? And so don't feed the beast, don't bait into hazard. But we've created, just because we got a thing that says freedom of speech instead of freedom of truthful, reciprocal, meaningful speech. we have this developed into, we've degenerated political discourse into the nattering between 12-year-old girls.
Mhm.
It's disgusting.
Costly.
Well, people wonder why we can't get legislation through. Why our government can't do anything. Well, I mean, our government's organized to prevent that from happening, right? It's organized to make legislation occur in the states and only be summarized in the federal government, right? When consensus met. So I don't know, it seems kind of out of hand.
You know, we got a legal system right now that's set up to be leveraged against anybody for anything at any time. So, I mean, what's the U.S. code at 90,000 pages, something like that at this point? That's you make enough laws, you can apply it. You can go after anybody for anything at any time, or for something at any time. So,
okay, so let's actually talk about this. A brilliant topic. So, what's the difference? Okay, so we use this word code and this word law.
right.
So, we use this word regulation and legislation. So let's. When I talk about law, I say findings of the court.
Yep.
Right. We talk about legislation. That's a legislation. But when we talk about regulation, that's a regulation can exist to make administrate legislation. And code is traditionally building codes, right? They're a standard of measure to fulfill a regulation in support of a legislation
Right.
under the law, right?
Yes.
So the problem is we use law and code as really general terms, like law replies to its laws. Well, I mean, it's enforced as law. It's not law, right? We enforce it as law. Legislation isn't law. It's enforced as law. Regulation isn't law. And in fact, that's the problem. The Supreme Court is just reversed. They've just disempowered bureaucracy from issuing regulations without having the legislation to approve it, right? And then code is just, it should be, look, this thing, I'm trying to find a USB cable that's not plugged into something. Of course, I don't have one. The code is that this thing's got to fit these dimensions. So there's a standard. Why? Because I don't want to build a house that the next person's coming by as and is going to have a fire or insurance or whatever, right? So it's part of being an insurer of last resort. So the same thing has to do with industry, like any industry, right? Right. So this is just a system of measurement for something. So I would expect codes to be voluminous. Right. I would expect regulations to be far less so. And I would expect legislation to be far, far less so. And I would expect the law to be parsimonious.
Right.
Right. That's what we should see. So what you're saying is, yeah, well, this is getting out of hand because we started this process of treating code, regulation, and legislation as if it's law. And this legislation doesn't expire, despite the fact that almost all legislation is actually to do with funding something.
Right.
Right. And so it needs to go away.
Yes.
Right. And so there's no like all contracts expire. Legislation is just a contract. Why doesn't it expire? So that's
they should all have sunset clauses.
They don't have
every
sunset
legislation
clauses.
should have a sunset.
So once you
it
understand,
should solve a problem. It should solve a problem. That's
well,
you're legislating something because there is a dispute. So the legislation should solve the problem of the dispute emerging in the future. If it doesn't, you didn't write good legislation.
exactly. And so that we've answered those things in our requirements for legislation. We've said these legislation has to meet these requirements. But I mean, so if you, but so I just want to. Luke's complaint is true, but it's right. It's also confusing.
Right.
So if you look at the U.S. commercial code, right? If you look at it, read it, it's actually really fucking good. I mean, but I know I have an OCD problem, but it's not a problem for me to sit down and read all of the code, right? All right. It takes a while. It's like when I got in the franchise business, I just read every piece of legislation because there are people who publish this shit, right? I mean, back in the day, it was like 11, 8-inch 3-ring binders, right? Or whatever it was of fucking shit, right? I just read it all. Right. It's not that in the end, it's not that complicated. It's like, don't fuck people over. Okay, that makes sense. And by the way, here's 5 or 8, these 8-inch, 5 or 8-inch 3-ring binders, right? This big shelf of binders full of all this stuff and all the court cases and all the legislation, whatever. And it's like, well, in the end, I mean, yeah, but that's because there's 9 million ways a franchisor can fuck over a franchisee. Right. So they've got to codify the 9 million ways. But the law is don't fuck somebody over.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's just. And so the problem is you can't count on I view this as the fundamental disconnect between the people and the legal system is that the legal system has become aware of every fucking scam in the world and tried to account for it. But you're a normal person and you're just doing what you think is okay. It never occurs to you that what you're doing could be interpreted as a scam rather than just a mistake.
Right.
All right. But the court has no way of knowing whether it was a scam or a mistake. And so the problem is the opposition will come in and accuse you of being a scam and saying, I'm just fucking human. And so this is the disconnect I see most of the time. It's why I said I can make anybody guilty of anything given enough knowledge of their life. And so that's why you don't want this $200 million spread on prosecuting a president when all you can get to come up with, despite the fact he runs an international empire, right? It includes casinos and shit, right? And all you can find out is that he's like tried to skip out on $500 worth of taxes for paying off a hooker, right? I mean, it's just obscene. Luke, what's the matter? You're thinking.
No, I agree.
Okay. So that's my belief. The final disconnect in the law is that the people, the court becomes aware through the record of cases of just how conniving and manipulative and shitty people are, and it frames their thinking. And so that's that's like I said, don't swim with the devil because you've been, don't dance with the devil because you've ended up smelling like him. So if you could just keep me away from them. So that, go ahead. No, I don't know if I've made my point, which I'm trying to say. The real point is, yes, there's way too much stuff. We say we don't know how to talk about the different parts of it. Some of it makes sense, but the real problem is there's no sunset on this shit. So it just keeps accumulating. It's the joke that there's still blue laws on the books in New England. I live here, right? But I mean, as far as I know, you can still graze your cow on Boston Common.
I hope that's true. Let's make a trip.
I'm almost positive it's still true. We've got stuff that's been on the, it's because common law is eternal, right? I mean, it's the record of all of adjudications over history. But the legislation that backs up that, right? The problem is that doesn't expire when it's no longer relevant. I mean, today we have laws that would practically say, well, you're prevented from grazing your cow on your herd on Boston Common because we don't want cow shit all over the fucking common, right? I mean, that's the answer. But legally, you could go there and say, I have the legal right to graze my cows on Boston Common, which it's pretty funny.
It's like Greg was telling me that he could still technically appeal to Magna Carta.
Yes, it's the common law. So the problem is that we don't have the sunsets on these things, even though they're all contracts between the legislatures on behalf of the people. But in other words, we have a principal agent problem, right? The legislators are the agents and we're the principals, right? And so the problem is those contracts don't end.
We just create a group of sunsetters. They look for laws that they can break that need to be reworked, and they go out and break them.
Well, we could do that, or we could just, do what we do every year is like hire so many extra lawyers today. I
like people better than lawyers.
You like people better than lawyers.
Yes.
Set B. Don't, in your statement that the lawyers aren't people, is that what you're saying?
Gotta demonstrate personhood.
They may be human, but they're not people, or they may be animals, but they may not be human and they may not be people.
Correct.
So, and if we don't fix that, we can't fix lawyers, right? We can't fix lawyers because their heads are full of the same nonsense. So that's why we have to articulate the law sufficiently so the nonsense goes away. Now, I was saying that if we publish our change to the Constitution, then it's like anything in conflict with this is sunset. Okay? All you have to do is bring it up and say, well, so that over time we could have people intentionally go through it, but which would be nice.
I was just thinking it'd be fun. Show up at the Commons with a herd of cow, have a party for yourself.
I'm surprised nobody's ever done that. Somebody has to have thought of it. I mean, come on, that would be fun. That would be a great publicity stunt. You'd only need like 5, right? I mean, you enough to call it a herd.
I mean, 1, you'd be all over the internet. But yeah.
Oh no, you got it. That's not dramatic. One of the back of a pickup truck. What?
I've read about some of those ridiculous laws, and I remember again in England that it's legal in York to kill a Scotsman if he's armed with bow and arrow.
Yes. Oh my God. So you can imagine like just open it up to the public. What needs to be, we don't have to hire lawyers, just open it up to the public. That would qualify as people in your case, Brandon.
That's right.
What you do is what would happen is a bunch of legal scholars would try to have a race for who could come up with the most ridiculous shit that needed to be removed from the legal code. And then Anyway, that would be fascinating. All right. Who is Andrew Schultz? Megan says, can we accelerate things drastically? Well, we can accelerate things drastically if Curt gets on Andrew Schultz's writing team.
He's a comedian.
He's a comedian?
He's a comedian. He does most of his work on YouTube. I believe he has a podcast.
Okay.
He's in New York. It's funny. Cutting. Witty.
Witty. Okay. I just didn't get it. Southern Poverty Law Center enjoyer. That's a really interesting one. I'm suspect of anyone that makes a point to denigrate our women or call them a Karen. Well, I mean, are you, why? It does nothing but open the door for women with genuine concerns to be dismissed when they're abused based on their ethnicity. I don't understand how that has to go to, there's three things there. You're suspect. You don't want people to be called women Karen when that's, it's basically a short.
It's not women in general, it's white women.
Oh, I see. Well, yeah, the definition of what considers abuse. Who is doing this piece? There's a woman can go to a place and they actually have a script for how to frame your husband for abuse. And it's based on, you can make up anything you want and you can just make it up. So what are we going to do, guys? We have to end Merit. We have to end this nonsense.
But white women also get called Karens if they justifiably call police on blacks or whatever.
Yes, I didn't get. Try to explain that.
All sorts of it.
Oh, you mean white women call on blacks?
Yeah, and there's a false stereotype that those blacks don't deserve that they were not doing anything suspicious.
Oh, that's crap.
Yeah.
No, Karen is there any truth to the Karen is the leftover pretty privilege? I think it's just women being outraged. I don't know.
Luke, is your mic on mute? Oh, sorry, your
No.
mic was moved. Well, there you go.
No, I was just chuckling to myself about that perspective, leftover beauty privilege. Good.
All right, so
The ugly ones feel entitled to do it now. So if it's leftover pretty privilege, the pretty part of it went away.
So I don't think if anybody's ever done it to me. I don't think.
I mean, it sounds like, where are you reading from? Like a YouTube comment?
Comment on it's just our comment stream.
I mean, we've been the target of what people describe as psychological warfare for a long time, and this is a demoralized people. There are people who express their dysfunction in many ways. Karening is one of those ways.
Yes.
Sometimes they're doing it criminally, and other times they are a victim of their environment.
Right. Well, I mean,
we have to be smart enough to discern between those two, and we're not.
Well, there's a fear response that provokes it. I don't have a problem with that, right? I mean, it's women provoking their fear response. There's
that was weaponized with the masks. Give them something to be afraid about that they shouldn't be afraid about,
right.
so that they spin themselves into a tizzy. Yeah.
The second one is they're breaking moral or norm, right? So they're objecting to a break.
They'd be shaming you.
Right, they're shaming. Well, the Karen effect is hyper zealous shaming. Right?
Yes.
Right. So there's causing her to be afraid. Like there's like don't approach women in parking lots. I mean, when I was a kid, you approach women in parking lots all the time. Say, can I help you? I still do it. I still help little old ladies in the parking lot, probably at least once a week. Then there's I suppose single mothers with children is probably. So you've broken a norm, or you've caught me. Right, so you caught me. All right, as a defensive response. So I see those three responses among the Karen discipline, and I think that's probably the right sequence. There might be more. There might be one in between there, in between 2 and 3. And it's like, okay, well, fine, but most of the time a Karen can be satisfied by, sweetie, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I'd offended you. Right? How can I make you feel better? What I mean, it's and I don't know, I don't understand, but some of them, they just wanna. It's the pretty privileged ones, I think. Like, remember the couple that stood out in front of their house with guns when Antifa kids or BLM kids were coming to the neighborhood? And like, they'll come in here. That woman kind of got a little spun up, and I'm like, yeah, she's afraid. And you had no right to. So we have a right to be here. You really don't. You have a right to be there. You really don't, actually.
You really don't.
You don't have a right to be there without purpose. You have a right to say, I mean, obviously a main street or a travel street, but you don't have any right to be in a neighborhood that without purpose, especially if you're suspected of being a threat.
So there are pro-social and anti-social expressions of all three of those reactions.
Exactly. So
we're seeing that a lot, in social media right now, the people getting in trouble because they respond to a violation, but there's no law protecting them, right? It's that I'm not touching you law, where people are in each other's faces, yelling and screaming right in somebody's faces, but they're not making physical contact. So if you do anything to defend yourself against that, you're the one that's at fault in that situation.
But that's that's just a failure of our law to for aggression. I mean, technically, don't invade a personal space, don't obstruct. And no, it's don't obstruct, don't challenge, don't invade a personal space, don't confront, and don't touch. Right. I mean, it's a pretty simple cycle. The problem is we don't disambiguate what's. I mean, what's the one? There's a woman and a black guy in an airport, and she's going off, and what he does is keeps invading her space until she physically reacts. Well, he was aggressing against her, right? Now, I don't know what caused the original thing, but if you maintain distance, right, right? And all I saw was a woman trying to break contact, right? You don't have the right to maintain contact. I'm testing Luke here to see if he has any. There's a way of framing this in situational awareness, but there's for example, the best thing you can always do with hostility is break contact. But if you break contact and you're pursued, that's an aggression. Right. So, if you invade my space, now you're aggressive, you're threatening me. Now, so do you have the right to invade my space and threaten me? No, absolutely not. Can I walk into your space and claim you were threatening? No, invading spaces. You're in, what is it? An arm's distance. I'm trying to see if you
I mean, it's just not being interpreted that way, though. I mean, you see people in each other's space. You see these protesters; they'll be blowing a whistle inches away from somebody's ear, and they face no consequence for that. Right. And if you push them away from you for doing that, you're going to face consequences for that.
Right.
So, I mean, just to tie it back into the Karen stuff, one of the things that we have to be aware of when we talk about suppressing antisocial behavior is there are negative consequences to doing that as well. We've over-suppressed masculine antisocial behavior. And so the Karen feels licensed to speak out.
Yeah.
And these people feel licensed to be in somebody's face, inches away from their face, blowing a bullhorn or a whistle into somebody's ear, because they know they're not going to get laid out for doing that, because they won't be held accountable. Male antisocial behavior. That's right. You should get knocked to the ground for that. But we don't allow that anymore because we've over-suppressed the masculine antisocial behavior. And that's to Martin's point earlier, where there's women that should be identifying a threat but they're not, or they're being faulted for it because we've over suppressed antisocial behavior. You don't get to call anybody a threat anymore for anything.
I'd rather say that we've suppressed pro-social masculine behavior along with antisocial.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
But we did it under the guise of suppressing antisocial behavior.
We're suppressing violence in all its forms instead of affording it to be pro-socially used, right? You can shame people correctly. You can gossip about people right properly. You can rally to the truth. They're tactics, not something to be stricken from our behavioral panoply.
We ought to be suppressing disproportionality, not the behaviors themselves.
Correct. There aren't bad instincts and intuitions. They're all emergent from pressure. So they're necessary in some form, in some environment.
Right.
We should be harnessing them and repurposing them to commons, not making universal decisions about particular behaviors and striking them from behavior itself. It's a mistake.
Mm-hmm. It's it basically sportsmanlike behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean,
without being held accountable and going through all this, like boys in my generation didn't play enough. So they don't know what it's like to get a physical consequence in the real world. Half of them never got one. So that's a dysfunction built into an entire generation. You can unwind it, but it has to be purposeful. They have to know that that's what they're doing, reacquainting themselves with nature, as Luke would put it.
Yeah, well, that's just to tie it back to the conversation about code. It's the same situation, right? The code, they may serve an absolutely viable function, but if they're not constrained to a proportional application, then they become a violation of everybody's ability to interact and engage.
mm-hmm.
Right? That positive application suddenly gets conflated or confused or spread to all these negative applications as well. That's the same thing we see with any of the suppression of these behaviors.
So why is the government in a position, or the police, or they're afraid to? In other words, I'm trying to say that, we've allowed this to happen, but it's happening on two fronts. It's happening legally, right? It's happening legal laws enforcement. We're having it administratively. Of course, the police are being told not to get involved. And we're facing socially, we're being told not to act. So basically, we're giving license to devolutionary behavior. We're rewilding the population.
Yes.
Structurally.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Well, I mean, we'll do this, right? I mean, we can codify this in law really easily, right? We can disambiguate it to what's possible, not, and it's not even difficult because I just went through it, right? I mean, basically, if you're 30 feet apart and you're not directing it at any individual, and there's no threat, that's fine. But I mean, the minute you're invading someone's space, you're shouting them down using amplifiers, right? Selecting out an individual, right? Now that's an aggression. It's the same thing as constructed. So what's happening is, I think, is that their only technique is always baiting into hazard. So what they're doing is they're trying to make it so they are free to bait into hazard, so that they can oppress in response, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what
standards, they can provoke you into a reaction. You can't provoke them.
And so what we would like to do is restore reciprocity, which is you can't engage in baiting into hazard by provocation. I mean, that's the law, right? I mean,
then I would go about it a different way. That if you're engaged in protest within that distance, you waive your protections against retaliation.
Yes.
I wouldn't forbid protest from that within that distance, because sometimes you need to get up close to a threat to address that threat.
Oh, I see. So you're saying if you break this rules, then you waive your protections.
Yeah, or yeah, if you break this distance or whatever, then you're agreeing to engage in whatever consequences emerge out of that interaction.
That's even better. I was just trying to bring that to terms. You're saying what happens upon violation of the terms. Yeah, that's good.
Use all the limits to steward agency, self-determination.
And so why don't they, so the problem is the right always loses because there's actually no constraint.
Well, the right also signals non-aggression, meaning it's their moral high ground. They hold the moral high ground as non-aggression too.
Mhm.
And that's an error. That's an error in their calculation in redressing the grievances they have with the left.
Right.
They should hold the position that we hold, which is non-submission.
Right. I forget where it is, but there's some places where there's no such thing as self-defense in a bar fight, right? It's that same rule should be all over the place. If you're in a political,
I actually don't know that. What does that mean?
that means you can't be if you're engaged in a bar fight, you don't get to prosecute your attacker claiming self-defense.
Oh, right, exactly.
You went to a bar and got rowdy. That's on you.
Right.
You entered the ring. There you go. Right.
But like right now, it's somewhere in Canada. I was just watching a video right now. They're trying to make it illegal to even protest any of this trans stuff within 100 feet. You can't utter words within 100 feet of any activity that's going on, right? And
Did you see the circus that they put up by the podium?
Yeah, exactly. With the circus by the podium, exactly. And so that's exactly what we're talking about. Make it suppress that antisocial behavior, right? But then the consequences, you have even fewer ways to oppose antisocial behavior.
Well, that's the goal.
Rewilding.
But that's the effect. I mean, that's one of the dangers of suppression, of just focusing entirely on suppression of antisocial behavior instead of on proportionality.
Mm-hmm. Where does this go in? This rights and obligations? Yeah. Is it rights and obligations or? Yeah, this is a rights and obligations property, right?
Proportionality can only be held by, undergone by the reciprocal, the accountable agent. Right?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, what part of the Constitution does this go under? It goes under rights and obligations.
Yeah, if you're a sovereign, the law holds you to proportional responses.
Right.
Reciprocity within the bounds of proportionality.
Right. So it's rights.
But it can't exclude proportional responses.
Correct. Well, a reciprocal response to you shrilling at me, right, is to slap you.
Yes.
So that is a proportional reciprocal response.
Yes.
To your offense. Well, I should be unable to unfurl that response without retaliation from the law. In fact, with a pat on the back from the law, or a medal or a cookie or some shit. Because I did their job for them.
I think I told you guys about I got somebody went and got the police because I told a Hispanic family, recent immigrants, that they were being disrespectful in a restaurant because they were too loud.
You got the cops called on you for that?
Yeah, they went and called their daughter because they didn't speak even enough English. And she went over and I said, well, they're running they're using the what do you call it, an iPad to hold a long distance meeting from within the restaurant, and they're being loud, and it's ruining it for the rest of us. It's invading the privacy of the rest of us. And so I asked them, this is not okay here in our culture. It's not okay. So we cut this off here and do that at home. And they kept up. And then I went back and said, it's not a barrio. right? This is a respectful business, and you're offending the rest of us. If you want to do that, you need to go home. And then the third time I said, what part didn't you understand? This isn't okay. And so they called their daughter, and it took a while. She came over and tried to get in my face, and then she went across the street, because it's right across the street from the police station. Got the police came in, and of course the staff backed me up. I said, I don't know, I thought I was doing my job as a citizen, providing, maintaining respect in the commons. And the staff backed me up, and there was nothing. But the cops didn't like having to come over and talk to me. When the answer should have been, what truthfully happened here, and was it a violation of the commons?
And a woman doing that same thing shouldn't be called a Karen.
Correct.
Well, I mean, I'm also not spazzing, right? I'm being a gentleman,
Right.
So, there's no respect for our high trust commons. They're just trying to destroy it by rewilding it, so nobody has to obey self-regulation. Right?
Well, if we don't respect it, we can't expect visitors to respect it. So.
We can respect it, but we can't defend it.
Which means we can't respect it.
Exactly. So
it's worse because we're punished for doing the job of the law. It's like a union job. You can't do the job of the law here. When it's everyone's job to do the job of the law, if you're able. In fact, the law prohibits you to pro-social behavior, as far as I can tell, or affords for punishments for all antisocial behavior.
It's kind of funny though that if you stand your ground, like I'm sorry, I did the right thing.
Correct.
Right, it's like the police don't want to hear it because they don't want to have to show up, right? That's the real issue. And they want to make it so that I'm some sort of aggressor, because of course I'm a white male. Right. And I'm like, I'm talking to two white male cops, right, that are in their 40s and 50s. Like, it's not okay. It's not okay behavior. And but the family and the woman were really upset that that the staff backed me up and it wasn't there. Well, they're not going to come back, but that's okay. The problem is they learned their lesson, right? That now they know, right? It's not a question anymore. And so I'm like, okay, well, I did my civic duty. So what, the problem is all of us need to be doing that civic duty. You see some of these Karens going off on. My favorite one is a guy who's driving really badly the driving regulations in India are not really regulations. They're whoever lives. And so this guy's coming over here, and she says, "This is not how we do things. We're respectful. We let people, And he says, he starts accusing him of her racism. And so she goes off on him, right? I'm like, okay, well, he was wrong. So why doesn't he realize he needs to do that? Obey our local custom. And
because he always has racism as an excuse. Why would we
that's
realize
right.
anything?
That's exactly right. That's the problem with whiteness in general, is it requires self-regulation. And self-regulation exists mostly in the Asian space and mostly among Europeans, but it doesn't exist everywhere else. There is some in different places, but it quite varies. So the problem being that if we can, like Luke's trying to make the point, is if we don't maintain the commons, we won't have it. And it's all this self-regulation that prevents people from self-expression, right? Which is just an imposition of costs upon the commons by their failure of self-regulation. So can we write this in code? Start bringing up code again. Can we write this in law? Absolutely. Although I think I'm going to keep this. I'm going to cut this and use this for when I work on this section. So we'll handle this issue about space. I have a I did great work on what you can do in the commons, right? But I didn't handle this issue of protest. Like you're talking about basically conflict. I think we could handle that quite nicely. You have to go through reforms every now and then, right? To clean up the messes.
We're going to go through a big one.
Well, let's open the question again. So can everybody behave respectfully in the commons?
Can they?
If you remove everyone who can't, yeah.
We can make commons that steward everyone's self-determination.
Yes.
The commons will not be free of infractions, but the infractions will be dealt with accordingly. That's the best we can do. But it should be demonstrable, meaning people should get better. I coached wrestling for years in a row. Each year, the kids were demonstrably softer than the year before.
You mean you made them softer in wrestling?
Mentally, emotionally.
You mean you made them by you teaching them every year? Your students get softer. You didn't clarify causality there, and so I'm like, that can be interpreted either way. So you basically teach kids to be soft in wrestling class? Is that what you're
doing? We do
talking
exactly the opposite. We teach them to be competent, right? And control themselves, even under the duress of being physically assaulted. Most won't do it, meaning a confrontational type of physical activity. They shy away from it. That's part of the softness, make people not fit enough to even try. But the other end of that is limiting aggression. If you're losing, you can't bite someone. I can't grab your finger and bend it back. I can't hit you in the throat. I can't poke you in the eye.
Right? I don't have any problem with any of those.
I can't grab you by the testicles.
I definitely don't have a problem with that one.
So there are rules. You can't be over aggressive either.
Yeah,
that's like a interpersonal equivalent of Geneva Convention.
Yes. But I was in wrestling too, right? What wrestling? What I noticed living in Ukraine and hanging out with Russians is they all take boxing, and that's a really good way of making you feel like you're in control.
Boxing and drinking. It's also a great way to have brain damage.
Jesus Christ, now I gotta take an inhaler. Well, to me, the team sport thing is really important. I think some martial art is important. I did fencing, karate, and wrestling. And especially because I'm small, right? I mean, Brandon and I are about the same size. Right? And so, if you can wrestle pretty well, you get the guy on the ground, and there's a lot of advantage lost. So I'm big into that. But will that work with everyone? I'm trying to ask the question. It won't work with everyone.
The physical disproportionality between people is incredible.
No, I'm not. I'm asking a different question.
All right,
this is in support of Luke's. I'm trying to say, how do we produce mindfulness? Right. And so can we teach most boys a martial art?
We can optimize within everybody's genetic limitations.
Are there any boys who won't learn a martial art? I can't imagine too many.
I don't think they'd be able to escape it under the normalcy,
Yeah.
right? Because the normalcy creates a competitive bed, right, to grow skills upon. So if you're making most people, boys do it in the way that boys learn is to win, like they're just going to get better at winning.
Under natural conditions, do any tiger cubs not learn how to hunt?
Hmm.
Right?
Of course,
Guys, boys aren't learning this stuff because of an artificial environment, not because of their proclivity or lack of proclivity to learn this stuff.
Well, when this was go back, and I sent this out earlier because I found a little clip on the short of an old man saying, it's Luke's thing is you can't be good unless you're dangerous.
Right.
Right. And this is really what I'm working around with here is that
I can integrate the frame from before. They're soft because people are hurting their potential. I didn't get them till high school. That's 4 years after they should know mostly everything they should know and have already been in physical contact with this place for years and years and years, and they were robbed of that.
Yes.
I mean, I can't remember second grade, but by third grade, fist fights were normal. Right. In fourth grade, I had a really big black eye one day, which caused a little bit of consternation because you're like, it's okay as nobody's, visible injuries are prohibited. You know what I mean?
Well, you look at, the public school system across the country has a zero tolerance policy for bullying in any way, shape, or form. So that's all of that normative pressure is forbidden. All of that normative exposure is forbidden. I mean, they're denied.
They do that to make it easier for the teachers. They're not doing it because it makes kids more anti-fragile.
Right. And they have no concept of proportionality. So they see all bullying as bad bullying when some of it is just the group, imposing the norm.
If you had to, if guys were all required to do probably 2 years of military service, because that's about what it takes to get you, in the system. Would that change how schools prepared students?
In today's military, no. In our rainbow service, I don't think so.
I can't imagine this shit's gonna last much longer.
Rainbow warriors.
They can find a means of sedition. The left finds it.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd be happy. It's after you train boys to be physical, the way we were just talking about, they'd be happy to be unleashed into an environment where they get to use weapons. They love that. Blow things up. It's access to things that are dangerous. Well, why isn't that attractive?
But you don't have. We're pretty paternal and responsible, right? That's who we're talking. We're talking about people, just our group. We're willing to take responsibility for a fucking nation, right? There's a bunch of other guys who are willing to take responsibility. But, in a democracy, now you've got to fight against the people who are trying to evade responsibility. So,
we don't got to fight against them. We just got to not listen to them at all.
I agree with that. So now let's take it the next step. Do we want, like Martin said a minute ago. So do you want to have a country where we got to parent all these losers?
We're in a position in history where we have a slew of dysfunctionals, but we did it. They're somebody's family. So a road to being able to fix it for yourselves is the best we can do for you. The clock people are running up against is when the forbearance of the capable people runs out.
Runs out, right? So which is what they're doing. They want it to run out so they can take authoritarian control. Basically, it's a female response, right? So,
Mhm.
so again, if we create a constitution, right, that puts this in place, do we actually want those people in the same country with us?
No, they're going to be begging to get in. They're the new refugees in the new world. How's it going to be good where they are?
Well, I mean, we have blue cities where people, I mean, hedonism reigns, right? But that's because the people who want to build capital have nowhere else to run to. Right. So, I mean, right now they're running to Texas and Florida. All right. So the problem is you've got to protect Texas and Florida from the bad people coming too. So if you say, well, we're going to put this together, you've got to leave some plantations for the left to live on, don't you? Right.
A lot of people are in the left because they're sheep, and if you indoctrinate them into something else, there'll be something else.
That's my understanding as well. So I feel like we have a 10-15% problem, maybe a 25% problem, but we don't have a 50% problem. I think because I think Martin's right, because there's ways we have a third of people on either side are committed, right? The middle, there's about 10 people who are actually fuzzy. They move around 10%, but it's only 10% of people who aren't sort of framed. But if you go out and you say, well, there's 30% of people on either side that are left or right, of those, how many are that firmly left? 10% of the population? 15? 6? I don't fucking know. Excuse me. I can't remember. I'm sure I can look it up, right? So I know I can think of the Pew study off the top of my head already. So, so if we just create sanctuary cities, we leave the sanctuary cities, and we prohibit everything elsewhere, would it just happen? Would you be willing to enforce it on everywhere except a few sanctuary cities? Let me put it this way: would most of our guys be willing to enforce it on everything except a few sanctuary cities for left fruitcakes?
All men capable would feel compelled to enforce it because the rewards would be disproportional to rewards garnered elsewhere by a lot.
Kind of ironic calling hellholes sanctuary cities, though.
Yes. Okay, so the next step is, so the world is really objecting to, unfortunately, the word liberalism. Well, so liberalism just means classical liberalism in Europe, right? And socialism means what we mean as liberalism in America. So, but most of the world objects to the violation, everything that puts the individual's hedonism against the interests of the intergenerational family, right? And they object to the conversion of the commons from a place for families to a place for dysfunctionals. And so, if you look at what every civilization objects to, it's the promiscuity, the homosexuality, the transactivism. Now I'm okay with them being, well, your women don't wear shit on their hair and they're, walking around in bikinis and stuff, because that's part of our tradition. But I mean, the destruction of the family, the feminization of everything, right? The doing our laundry in public. That's all the stuff people hate, right? The rest of the world objects to that stuff. Do they object to?
It's also all hyperconsumption, sin, and crime.
Right, of course, it's their right to object to it all, right? So, most baiting, and really what they're saying is, I don't want you baiting my children into that hazard. That's really what they're saying. That's the world's objection to Western leftism, right? I don't want you baiting my children into that hazard.
There's a reason we call it degeneration.
Yes. So
the opposite of that intergenerational transfer.
And immigration, of course.
Correct. So, if the rest of the world is right on those things, does the rest of the world object to rule of law? In other words, having a written rule of law, democracy. I mean, democracy other than in favor of this degeneracy. Our defense of the sovereignty of nations. All right, and I mean, as far as I can tell, it's this culture war that the rest of the world objects to. It's not the rest of the West. Am I wrong about that? I don't think so. They're certainly not happy with our wars against the Middle East.
There's a lot of questions in there.
If I'm the rest of the world watching the West right now, I look at your entire system as supporting degeneracy, including all your laws. So I oppose all of it.
Right. That's because we've allowed this to sit on top of our laws.
Right. I mean, our laws right now inhibit the defense of the commons.
Right.
They're also demonstrating defecting.
Yeah.
And most of them use delay and deceive. So their defection is late from when they've actually defected from you.
Right. I can find this. Where it is. There it is. Rights and obligations.
And in a lot of ways, you could point to the tolerance of classical liberalism as being the vector by which the vulnerability that's currently being exploited was introduced.
So what I'm like, what I'm, for example, right now, I can't get a response from any of these guys yet, but it seems like the Russian. Why aren't we talking about a vision for the future of Russia as a means of talking about a vision for ourselves? In other words, it seems like a great framework for talking about what's wrong with the West. Right? Does that make sense? And what's wrong with Russia? In other words,
we're in the other frame. They're on the other side of it. They're allied with the other entity in that war, trying to push the liberalism and the globalist thing the other way. Yes, your idea is superior. No one's doing it.
It seems to me like we have no business talking about what's wrong with anyone else if we can correct ourselves.
I agree. What I'm trying to get at, what I'm getting at is, I want to use that circumstance as a means of criticizing ours. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Their real problem, of course, is that they're not allowed to be responsible for the commons. Right, the political common, economic common. Corruption is fucking terrible, right? But they're allowed to be responsible for the family. And so they are. They also have the benefit that orthodoxy is a better religion it turns out that it's the better version of Christianity for modernity.
Because you have to do it.
Well,
because you have to practice it.
Well, it's also it's very spiritual rather um uh than theological in the sense of the church or Protestant denominations, which is biblical. And so it's also, so it's more of a, and it's also it's tied to the state. It's not universalist, right? It's a religion of the state. So I look at these pieces, I'm like, well, they have a lot of things right. The problem is that they're still under this corrupt government that is hurting them. And so why wouldn't be talking about that particular issue be a good way of exposing what's wrong with ours? I just think that's an interesting way of approaching the problem. I just have to find someone who's capable. I have to talk about a Russian who's a dissident, basically, who's capable of having that conversation. Because if you get the Russian who's capable of having it, but they're just another fucking liberal who wants to have rainbow flags and whatever. Not that I'm anti anything, but I'm anti-trans, but I'm not anti. I don't care about the homosexual thing. I just don't want it to be celebrated. I want it to be tolerated, accepted. Because I don't want the baiting into hazard to occur. Which is the reason for the prohibition on it, and in his history is that it baits the young into hazards. So they're not responding to whether you think that would be a good frame for having the discussion.
It's hard to get our people to be in the frame of protecting children. We're a generation away from having them. There's a gap in having children, so we don't have incentives to protect them. A 10-year lag. But it is the right frame.
I think the frame is help each other.
Yeah.
Right. Not to say we're better, is that we need your help with this and you need our help with that. And how can we solve this by helping each other? Because you're white, you're Christian, you're European.
We can't do anything for our children's children without cooperating with the people who are like us.
Right.
Well, it's not possible.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you want to try what hasn't been tried before, what the globalists want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I'd suggest against it.
All right. I can run down that one. So I've run that sequence as far as I can run it now across scales. So I've run it from I've run it all the way up to the international level, so I have nowhere else to take it. All right, so I run that theory out. And what I'm looking at here is I'm looking at where do I incorporate all this into rights and rights, obligations, and alienations. It shouldn't be too hard.
We did it. I mean, the Constitution, life, liberty, and property. Life is family. What else would it be?
Well, as the problem is that you have to make an argument to reasonableness there. And we know that the way the enemy works is they don't argue to unambiguousness, truth.
The founders were reasonable people.
Well,
they meant the reasonable thing.
Yeah, I know what they meant, but we're against an enemy who uses reasonableness as a means of ambiguity.
So good thing we use unreasonableness to solve problems.
Because that's how they use the term reasonable. And that's the same way that
I know, but that just keeps you from being intolerant, which is what's necessary.
Well, then you're just agreeing with me.
Of course.
Okay.
We're in agreement. I talked about it with someone yesterday. Like, people are taking the children and women too seriously.
Yes.
There's an enemy to be taken seriously, but they're not the people that you're taking seriously. You have your eyes on the wrong set of people.
All right, well, we've run up against our 2-hour mark. I've got a couple of good clips out of this one. Anything else? Anything else going on? No? No? Okay. All right, I enjoyed this. Martin, you and I'll try to schedule something. Brandon will continue. Luke, I see you next Monday, I guess, is it what it is?
Yeah.
How many chapters in your book?
16.
16. So we just finished 8 or
Yes.
9 or 9. 8?
9 is the one on deck.
9 is the one on deck. All right, so we're halfway there. I've been having a lot of fun with that.
That's it.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for this very fruitful discussion. Let's go see if Jacob is done with entertaining his female friend or whatever it is he's doing instead of spending his time in our August company. Thank you very much, everyone. Like, subscribe, whatever. Thank you.